Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in and watching and or listening to the Real Short Box. This is part of our interview, our gold standard interview series. My name's Donald. I'm here with, of course, with Kevin, Chris, and one very special, very specially talented guest, one writer, director, and all-around nice guy, David Avallone. Thank you for being on, David.
Thank you, Donald, Kevin, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, this is great. David, we met you, Kevin and myself, through Julio's event that he had at We Can Be Heroes in Chatsworth, California. They had a We Can Be Heroes event, and you came in for a signing, and you were nice enough to say, hey, yes, I would do this interview, and we very much appreciate that.
Happy to be here.
Great, great. So let's kind of get started here with a little bit about you, Kevin. You said you had some questions you were just chomping at the bit to ask. So go for it.
Well,
boy.
Wait. Hold on, Donald.
Yeah.
Before we get this interview started, probably, I mean, our guests are dressed pretty nice. And look what we're wearing.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
That's true. I did notice that. You two are a little underdressed.
Well, you didn't say that you were dressing, Kevin, and David, I wasn't sure, so I feel a little embarrassed.
This is how I always dress. But you could spruce it up a little bit.
Yeah. You know what? Actually, we can do that. Yes, we can do that. Chris, on 3, sir. 1, 2, and
well. Look at that. A little better, a little improvement. Not as good as David and myself, but a little better.
We set a high standard, Kevin.
I mean, I'm trying.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Especially for Northeasterners.
I think my hat's becoming invisible slowly, which is kind of makes sense if we're going with the topic of what we're talking about here with a lot of what David writes and stuff. So, but we'll get into that in a little bit. We were wondering, Kevin, you had some questions that you wanted to ask.
Yes, Mr. David, first and foremost, where are you from? Where did you grow up, sir?
I was born in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and raised in the nearby, very Spielbergian suburb of East Brunswick, New Jersey. I was born in 1965. Raised in the 60s and 70s. In 1969, the Mets won the World Series and Armstrong walked on the moon, convincing me that we lived in a time of miracles. Didn't really pan out that way in the 70s. But that's where I'm from. My mother was a women's rights activist, and my father was a novelist, published about 200 published novels.
Oh, wow.
And that is the atmosphere that I grew up in, and I think it explains a lot.
Yeah. Interesting. Now, if I recall, New Brunswick is not too far from Rutgers University.
Rutgers is in New Brunswick. Yes.
All right.
That's where the main campus is.
All right.
And when I was a teenager in my early 20s, in the 80s, it was a great rock and roll town. And the Smithereens, for want of a better example, came out of that music scene, and New Brunswick was so hip in the early 80s that, for reasons I have never been quite clear on, the writer of Buckaroo Banzai felt that the Banzai Institute belonged in New Brunswick, New Jersey, which, if you watch the film, it is in. And the Hong Kong Cavaliers play a bar in New Brunswick, New Jersey, a fictional one, but that was sort of part of like the zeitgeist of how people viewed that town at that time. Is that a cool physicist rock star, if he was going to live somewhere on the East Coast, he would actually live in New Brunswick.
There we go. Isn't John Bon Jovi from the area too? I know he's from Jersey, if I recall.
Bon Jovi's from I feel like Bon Jovi's more of a shore guy. I don't really know. Not a follower, so to speak. I remember the airplanes with the streamers behind them on the beach at the shore, I should say. I felt like they were always advertising Twisted Sister. That was always the band that was playing that night. It was eternally Twisted. Maybe Twisted Sister were the only guys who could hire an airplane. I have no idea.
Well, it's great to be from New Jersey. A lot of famous people from New Jersey, like besides yourself, John Bon Jovi, Tom Cruise, Lauryn Hill. The list goes on and on.
He's from New Jersey. I don't think I knew that about him, but that makes
Yeah, I believe he grew up there too.
Yeah.
There's also Medieval Times there, so there's that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And Great Adventure, a great amusement park.
Six Flags Great Adventure. Oh yes.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Good times.
Did your father inspire you to become a writer? Because I know, as you stated, he wrote 200 published novels.
You know, the thing is, I wasn't really a full-time writer until the last like 8 or 9 years. It's something I've always done, but I was in the film industry for years and years and years. I actually think my father being a writer consciously or subconsciously made me not go down that road since he had it so well covered. But when I was a kid, he was a huge movie nut. And I actually think if he had grown up in a different age, he would have wanted, he would have, film was not a thing that was possible in his generation. Film was expensive. Film was, making independent films is not something you really did if you were born in 1924, unless you had, resources he did not grow up with. But a man sitting alone in a room with a pencil can write a novel. And so he, that was what he came from. And my grandfather was a sculptor. And I had an art professor in college who said, your family is kind of the history of Italians in the arts, that your grandfather was a sculptor in marble and your father's a novelist and you're a filmmaker. It's all kind of a continuum. And that same professor said, and I think this is really the answer to your question, there's a thing in Italian culture where there is nothing unmanly about a career in the arts. There's not like go work in a factory, like it's not really an Italian thing to say, well, you want to be an artist? What's wrong with you? Like you're,
Of course not.
Well, why don't you go work in a factory? Why don't you go flip burgers? It's like, no, it's sure. You're gonna try that hard thing, sure. Because there's a little more of a tradition of respect for the artists.
Well, and obviously going back to the Renaissance era, obviously.
Yeah.
And also great Italian filmmakers such as Bertolucci and Fellini. I mean, obviously, no one would ever say anything like that.
Yeah, no, and Fellini was a huge influence on me. I think it even shows up in my comic books a little bit now and again.
It absolutely does. Yeah. I was noticing that when I was reading. I was like, okay, yeah, I can see the influence there.
Yeah.
So.
And also,
go ahead, Kevin. It's fine.
I was gonna say, and also, if you're a horror movie fan, there's Fulci and Argento as well, as far as the Italian filmmakers.
Sure.
Yeah. And you can see some of the definite horror influences in your work, like as far as your comic books and stuff. What I was reading, particularly with the Elvira run, you have a lot of that, and that makes sense because it fits perfectly into there.
Yeah. Well, I will say that I'm not a horror fan more than I'm a fan of other genres. Like I'm not more of a horror fan than I'm a sci-fi fan. Or a mystery fan or any of that. And actually the key to Elvira, when they offered it to me initially, I was a little bit, I had just done Betty Page. I was like, this is another like hot chick that I'm supposed to turn into a comic book character. I don't know what to do with that. And artist Dave Acosta, who is a huge Elvira fan and wanted to work on that book badly, and his way in was if I got the gig, said, no, it's a comedy book. It's a comedy book with horror elements. It is not a horror book with comedy elements. You're not scaring people on every page. You are making them laugh on every page and using horror as the sort of thing. So that helped me a lot, not feeling like I had to make something that was, he sent me pages from like Jerry Lewis comics from the 50s and Angel and the Ape and Mad Magazine and said, this is really the direction to go with Elvira. And he was 100% right. And that is the direction we have gone with Elvira.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could definitely tell like that there's a lot of influence from the past, from her past history too, from Cassandra Peterson's past history.
Sure.
For example, Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, when that film came out, that was, man, my mom didn't let me watch a lot of like horror stuff. And that was borderline because there was some horror elements, but it was primarily a comedy.
Yeah.
So she was okay with me watching that. So I got to see that when I was young, and it was so cool, like to watch that. And you can definitely see, because like even like in the series, you can see where her house looks like the house from.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
from,
No, I use all the I to the degree that there there isn't really a continuity I'm working off of, but to the degree that I'm working off of a continuity, the movie is considered canon. You know, that is in that character's past history. So yeah, we use the house, we use the macabre mobile, we use little Gonk as much as I possibly can get Gonk in.
Gonk's the best.
Gonk is great.
I love that.
Great.
When I first saw Gonk, I was like, "Oh, that really brought me back." It really, more so than Elvira herself, the house, the car, any of that. Seeing Gonk was like,
"Oh." Gonk is a great element, and you know there are times when it gets a little tiresome. You can't really bring a dog on every adventure because it gets kind of exhausting having to constantly be like, what's the dog doing? Like it all turns into the Wizard of Oz after a while. Where you have to give the dog something to do. The dog has to be pivotal. And I didn't want to do that all the time. So the dog doesn't come with her on every adventure. But when the dog is around, like in the Omega Mam special, the Gonk is very central to that story. And we made sure that Gonk was with her. Partially also because I did, it's a post-apocalyptic story of a sort. And you never want the audience going, what happened? Is Gonk dead? Did something terrible happen to Gonk? So, like, it's you never want people worrying about what you did to the poor dog.
It's true. And for those that don't know, Gonk is a poodle that's kind of punked out.
A toy poodle with like a purple mohawk.
Yeah,
and they're adorable. They're adorable.
Yeah, I think
some other elements,
something, or like a little thing dangling. Yeah, it's just so cool. I remember that. So yeah, so this the one that I kind of what I just was reading not long ago that we actually talked about in the shop was Elvira meets Vincent Price. But it's a wonderful series that you wrote. Where Elvira is visited basically by the spirit of Vincent Price, and Vincent Price is like, we need to talk. And she's like, okay, is this still part of a dream? Is this a hallucination? What is this? And it's basically the spirit of Vincent Price visits Elvira to have her help him prevent a film from being shown, to where they recite this incantation and this spirit is let loose and kind of could destroy the world.
The Egyptian god Amun-Ra will come back to destroy the world, and it's all based on. It's funny to say this, but it is based on a true story within reason. When I was supposed to come up with a plot for this series, a friend of mine named Val D'Orazio, a comics writer and editor, you may recognize the name, by sheer coincidence did a blog post about this movie called The Aries Computer. You can look it up on the IMDb. It doesn't exist. It was announced in 1971 as part of a 12-movie series. All the movies were going to be Signs of the Zodiac, and they were all going to be horror movies. The first one was going to star Vincent Price, and it was going to be called The Aries Computer. And for various reasons, the deal fell apart, and the movie didn't get made, but also for various reasons that have to do with it not being the present day and there being no internet. Some very lazy editors of film yearbooks added it to their books as though it had been released. So it became this sort of famous lost, what happened to this film? Why has no one ever seen this film? Well, it never got made. They never shot a foot of it. They never even began. But it's on IMDb, and I think like the first trivia thing is, actually, this movie doesn't exist. This was announced. I think even some very lazy, again, film guidebook guy, like actually even wrote a review of it. Because, he felt safe going, mediocre Vincent Price horror movie. Who's gonna double check that? And then the movie doesn't get made.
Right.
Anyway, so that seemed like, this is something I say a lot, but I'm a big believer in research. When you go into any project, you learn about the things, and there are things that are completely made up out of whole cloth, and there's not much you can research, but there's always something that has something to do with the real world. And in this case, Vincent Price is a real guy with a real life.
Mhm.
And so basically, like the day I was trying to come up with a pitch, this story about a lost Vincent Price film that didn't exist fell into my lap. And again, research being research, I went, okay, the Aries Computer. Aries is the bull. What can I do with the bull? How can a lost film have like any kind of plot around it? Why would it be lost? Who lost it? Why did they lose it? Why, if it was made, why was it suppressed? What was in the film that needed to be hidden?
Right.
And I'm old enough to remember in the 70s, there was this huge run of apocalyptic films about ancient prophecies coming true.
Uh-huh.
The Omen being sort of the most famous one. But there's literally like dozens of them. And a lot of them are terrible, low-budget movies, and this probably would have been one of them. And yeah, so the Aries thing sort of led me to ram-headed gods, and ram-headed gods led me to Amun-Ra. And I went, yeah, sure. Egyptian stuff. That's interesting. Let's do that. So I think it's called Rise of the Ram. And the film basically, it's the other way around. The film actually has the incantation to prevent the second coming of Amun-Ra. So they need to find the film so they can keep the cult of Amun-Ra from bringing him back.
That's
But anyway,
right.
that's
the lady, what was it? Cleopatra's 21st Century Terrors.
Yes.
She was going to bring Amun-Ra back.
Well, and that's the other thing is the first page of that. It's always kind of interesting when you're dealing with someone's real life and you're putting in things that were maybe not their favorite thing that ever happened to them. And I do this a lot with Cassandra, and she's always okay with it. The first page of that, Cassandra had tried to sell both Netflix and Shudder on a reboot of her series, and they both at the time turned her down. So the first page is a Netflix type company turning down Cassandra and a character that is kind of transparently based on me. They're pitching at Netflix and they get turned down. And when I turned the script in, I was like, I hope she's okay with me kind of making fun of the fact that that failed. And she's absolutely fine with it. And of course, she had the last laugh. Last Halloween, Netflix and Shudder did a whole thing with her as Dr. Elvira introducing horror movies. So she did fine. But yeah, that was another, I took something in current events and went, okay, so she got turned down by Netflix and Shudder. That's a good starting off point. House on Haunted Hill is her favorite movie since childhood. So I made that, to cheer herself up. She watches House on Haunted Hill and Vincent comes out of the TV.
Right. Yeah. Based on her imagining of him, because he could project his spirit from what she's thinking, and she was thinking of that movie. So when he came out, was that character.
Yeah, we do a thing throughout the series where whatever they're talking about, he morphs into the most appropriate movie character.
I thought that was a really cool touch.
When they're talking about ancient Egypt, he turns into his character from the Ten Commandments, Baka, the Master Builder.
Right.
And it's just a funny visual thing to have him keep changing. But he resets. My favorite Vincent Price movie and his own favorite movie was Theater of Blood. So he always resets as Edward Lionheart from Theater of Blood. Because that's, to me, that's, Vincent as Vincent in a way. Yeah. But delightful. I mean, dead before I started really getting any serious work as a writer, and you always go like, I would have really liked to work with that person, and this gave me an opportunity to work with Vincent Price in a way that I never would have thought possible, and it is delightful to write for him. Right. And his daughter Victoria was is the license holder of his image and his memory and all of that, and I expected to get some pushback or notes or something, and she must have just liked all of it because I got nothing. She never made me change a single line of dialogue. And she wrote in her book about him being sexually fluid, for want of a better word, and I included that. Some people asked me before I started, are you going to put that in? I was like, well, he's a ghost. It's not going to come up a lot. He's not going to be having sex with folks, since he's a ghost. But there were there were ways for him to certainly talk about his past life and what he likes and what he doesn't like. You know, there's a scene in the second issue where he finds a sex dungeon in the house of a director and actress, and he says, well, I'm the last man on earth to kink shame somebody.
Right.
And again, that's like, if you're paying attention, that's Vincent as he was. He would not be someone to, he would not be offended by seeing someone's ball gag in their, you know, and their riding crop in their basement. He'd be all for that. That's all just fine. So I tried to do him, you know, do him that kind of as much justice as I could, obviously.
Yeah, Vincent, some of his stuff is truly really, really good. I mean, it's like
Oh yeah,
there's some of it that's a bit, you know, hammy and heavy-handed and stuff, but like, for example, I'd say about 5 years ago, I watched The Tingler for the first time.
yeah, that's a great
And
picture.
I got to see it at well, you're an LA guy, so I got to see it at the silent movie theater, where they have the buzzer seats. So
Funny.
they presented it just it was such a wonderful production.
Sure.
They showed the film, and then they hooked up some of the seats. So during certain scenes,
Sure.
if you were sitting in the seat that was hooked up, your seat would vibrate and it would like tingle you, you know, it would give you a little shock, so to speak.
That's fun.
And then like partway through when the nurse, you know, was screaming and stuff, they brought in an actual actress as a nurse to come in and scream and run through the theater and stuff.
That's
So it
great.
was just
I love
such
that
a
kind of stuff.
yeah, it was such a fantastic production and such a fantastic way to be introduced to that film. I mean, I could have watched it you know, at, like, you know, during like maybe one of Elvira's screenings at nighttime, you know, or the, you know, what was it for me? My local one was Son of the Ghoul, which was Cleveland, Ohio based horror schlock, you know, kind of guy. I could have been introduced through that, but to be introduced like this in a theater on a big screen with the Tingle seats and the pageantry with it, it was truly special.
Yeah, no, it's great. There are some movies that I would start watching on cable or TV, and 5 minutes in, I would go, "This is too good. Can I wait until I gotta wait and see this in a movie theater?" One of the big ones for me was Vertigo. I watched the first 5 minutes in Vertigo and go, "This is such a fucking beautiful piece of art." When a commercial comes on, I'm gonna fucking cry. So
Yeah.
I'm just gonna stop. And it did get a big re-release. It got the sound was remastered for stereo and all that. And it's one of my favorite movie-going experiences. And when we got together, my wife had never seen Once Upon a Time in the West, and I was like, I have the DVD, but I swear to God, if you watch it at home, you fall asleep, and if you watch it in a movie theater, it'll be one of your favorite movies you've ever seen. Like, it's such a different, that slow pacing for 3 hours, you gotta sort of be trapped. If you're
Right.
not trapped, you won't let it put you in a trance. And then, you know, the New Art or the Arrow showed it like 10 years ago, and I got to take her to see it. Now we can watch it on DVD. It's fine. Like, but that first time, to let it really hit you, you know, you gotta take it in the right way. But I will say one thing about research. Vincent was an extraordinary guy, beyond being an actor, as a patron of the arts, there's a Vincent Price Art Museum in East LA. He's a gourmet. I bought his cookbook. Man has a cookbook.
Yes.
Just a really
Renaissance man.
A true Renaissance man and a really good guy. And that's a rare enough thing that it's really great to be able to write a character like that and not have to make him up. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's special. He's like the stuff that he was into. I remember the cookbook. They occasionally I'm part of an online kind of a Facebook group for it's called the Gentleman's Guide to Midnight Cinema. And basically they talk about midnight movies, you know, and Vincent Price comes up quite a bit.
Oh, I'm sure.
And occasionally somebody will post like a picture of him and it shows him like talking, and he would talk about like a recipe or something in the cookbook, and there's a little blurb and stuff. So it's always cool to see that kind of stuff, because you if he wasn't like you know, growing up, you know, a lot of younger people might not know, you know, the things he was into or the stuff that he's done. So it's nice to be introduced that way, in other words.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'll say something about the, for want of a better word, the hammy acting. There's on the director commentary of the third Star Trek movie, Nimoy talks about Shatner, and he says, you know, a lot of people make fun of Bill for his style and for all that. And he says, here's the thing, the show is a complete failure without Shatner. And the reason, and this is, I'll connect this to Vincent Price, you'll see where I'm going. The sets are cardboard. The monsters are paper mache. The spaceships are goofy plastic models that look ridiculous in half of the scenes. You need someone to bring a level of intensity and belief to every scene, who can look at the view screen and he's looking at a tennis ball on the end of a C-stand arm and going, Spock, it's the Klingons. And if you underplay that moment, the audience goes, that's a plastic model. I don't give a shit about that. So Vincent Price is stalking around these paper mache castles with a bunch of people in the worst, most unconvincing makeup you have ever seen in your life. Blood that looks like it was squeezed out of a 5-year-old's paint set. You know, tempera paint squeezed out. And he's bringing it, he's playing it like it's Shakespeare. He's playing it like he's playing King Lear every single time. He never condescends to the material, you know, and that, I think that's a real key to being vivid and being remembered forever, is you're standing on this cardboard set and not 1 ounce of you is going, ugh, another fucking Corman movie. I can't believe I'm doing this to myself. But instead you're going, come in, you know, like, right. And that intensity, and it raises the game of everyone around you. And if it doesn't, they look bad, you know, frankly, if they don't match you on your level. So, I mean, in, you know, Theater of Blood, which I mentioned earlier, the cast of that is extraordinary. His daughter is played by Diana Rigg. It's got a great director. It's a great movie. They're not all schlock at all, but there are movies that are definitely schlock. And the mere presence of Vincent Price makes them not schlock. Yeah. He's also part of a tradition that I'm a little bit fascinated by, the leading man who, once he passed 25, everybody realized he was maybe a little too creepy to be a leading man. Because when Price breaks in, he's kind of a conventional, handsome dude in movies for a minute. And it's sort of like David Cronenberg saved Jeremy Irons' career by going, you know what? You're not a leading man. You're Boris friggin' Karloff, my friend, and you're going to spend the rest of your, you know, you're not going to do movies where you're kissing Meryl Streep ever again. That was nice for you, and it was a good moment in your career. But from here on in, man, you're fucking Dr. Frankenstein, and you should lean into it and be the creepy, bony weirdo that you are, and be a giant movie star being a bony, creepy weirdo. And I think that's what, you know, there's a very early movie the same year that he makes Laura, in which he's sort of like the disposable gigolo boyfriend, the sort of useless, handsome boyfriend. He makes a movie called Dragonwyck, where he's the master of the manor who goes slowly insane. And the whole template for the rest of his career, no one really asked him to play the guy, the useless boyfriend from Laura again, but that crazy rich dude from Dragonwyck. I mean, let's see more of that from you.
Yeah, there's something there.
More of the crazy weirdo who slowly loses his mind over the course of a movie.
Right.
That's going to be your thing.
I wonder if they asked him, they're like, can you go full Vincent Price?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Before full Vincent Price was a thing.
Right. But yeah. Really quickly, I know Chris has some questions that he wanted to ask, but before we get into that, the last issue of this Elvira Meets Vincent Price, let's talk for a moment about that and what that's leading into, because I think you have some exciting things coming.
Yes, that sets up. So in the last issue, the first 4 issues cover the whole plot of the Rise of the Ram, and the 5th issue is kind of a standalone issue where, since Vincent came out of a movie, we sort of we learn that all movies create their own little parallel dimensions where the story of the movie plays over and over and over again. And the plot of the 5th issue is that a creepy, abusive director named Stanley Saliva, I'll leave it for the clever kids at Cast to figure out who I'm talking about, traps an actress in the dimension of his shitty horror franchise called The Creepy Crawler. Is that what I called it? Again, I'll leave it for the clever kids to figure out what franchise I'm talking about. And they have to go into the universe of these movies to get her out.
Mm-hmm.
And that leads to a cliffhanger where Elvira gets stuck in a very famous horror movie, or I should say at least a parody version of a very famous horror movie. And so the first issue of the next series, which is called Elvira in Horrorland, is called Block Party. For those of you who know the name of the author of Psycho, that joke will land for you. The second issue is called She's a Kubrick House. You can guess which horror movie she might be in that one. And today I was just watching a movie for research for the third issue, which will be called either Ridley's Believe It or Not or Geiger Encounter. Again, deep cuts for the fans.
Right.
And found some funny stuff to do with that franchise. So, and these are all these are nonstop Easter eggs about the movies. I'm a huge movie fan, so She's a Kubrick House isn't just The Shining. We get in a little. She runs into Barry Lyndon in the lobby of the Overlook Hotel in that comic because I couldn't resist putting everything in that I possibly could. And of course, her presence in these movies she disrupts the story, which makes the universe start to unravel. And in ways that I won't blow for you, but are a lot of fun.
That sounds like a lot of fun. I'm really excited. When did you say that comes out?
May 22nd is the first issue.
And that's from Dynamite?
That's from Dynamite. If you go in your local comic book shop and pick up the latest issue of previews, which the funniest thing I have ever written is the solicit for the second issue of that series. I will never top it.
Yeah.
Absolutely never top it.
Okay.
It is just like a paragraph of solid Stanley Kubrick jokes that I couldn't have even fit in the comic. It's just,
Who's from the Bronx, just like your dad.
That's right. That's right.
Now, Chris, you had a couple questions, I think.
Yeah. Well, the first question I had was, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how radically rearranged Ronin Ragdolls came about.
How that came about? I became friends with I met Kevin Eastman. For those listening who don't know, and there may be a few, he's the co-creator of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, at a convention at Emerald City Comic Con in 2015. And for a variety of reasons, we sort of became instant best friends. One of them is that we just have a lot in common, but another one is that we actually missed meeting twice before. I was working with a company called Limelight in the late 80s, and I quit the job literally like 5 minutes before they went into production on the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie. I worked with an independent, sort of legendary exploitation movie director named Andy Sedaris. I made 2 movies with Andy. I ghost wrote and ghost co-directed 2 of his movies. The second one was with Julie Strain. Andy and I stopped working together after that movie. A couple of months later, Kevin marries Julie Strain and ends up hanging out with Andy Sedaris for 5-6 years making those movies. So we were almost friends twice before, and the third time it stuck. So after we had hung out a few times, he mentioned to me that he had this series that he wanted to do. He said the title's terrible, we won't use it, but what I call it for now is On the Shoulders of Giants. And I want it to be sort of a thing about a life and a career like mine, but like every funny, interesting, crazy show business story you and I have ever heard, we'll find a way to work it in. And if it's about a guy like Kevin, his name is Shane Bookman. His friends call him Books. And Shane, we needed a thing that Shane had created that would be like the Ninja Turtles. And Kevin had come up with something called the Radically Rearranged Ronin Reptiles. They were green and they were very sexy. And as we got to working on it, mostly in our heads, it was just, they're like the Ninja Turtles, but there are 3 of them, and they're girls, and they're reptiles, and that's all we need to know about them. And as it went along, I kept saying, I don't feel like I came up with the title Drawing Blood for On the Shoulders of Giants. And I said, well, I need to know more about these 3 characters in order to write them into Drawing Blood, as they sort of show up as Jimmy Crickets in his conscience talking to him. I said, so we really need to dive in and create this thing. And I went down to San Diego, and we had an epic hangout for a weekend and made a bunch of notes. And I can't remember when it came up, but right when we were about to pull the trigger on doing a Ragdolls comic, doing a Reptiles comic, Kevin called me up and he said, the more I think about them being green, the more I feel like I'm going to piss off Nickelodeon without wanting to or needing to, because they are the current owners of, he sold the Turtles to Laird like 17 years ago, a long time ago. Mm-hmm. If not longer ago than that. And then Laird sold them to Nickelodeon not too long after that. And he said, and reptiles, it's kind of, and I have cats. I was going to suggest cats, and Kevin beat me. He was like, how about cats? Everybody loves cats. I was like, great. They're cats. So we decided they'd be 3 cats. I looked for cat breeds with R names because I couldn't, I needed an R word that suggested cats. None of the 3 cats in the Ragdolls are actually Ragdolls. Miyazaki kind of looks like a Ragdoll, but not really. But we thought that was a good enough blanket name for the 3 cats. And as I just said, instead of being named after Renaissance painters, they're named after anime directors. The psychotically violent one is named Otomo. The leader is named Tezuka, and the gentle poetic one is named Miyazaki. If you know your anime films, you know why they have those names, and each one of them has a little bit of an indicator. Otomo is wearing the red leather jacket from Akira. Tezuka has Astro Boy's bright red boots, and Miyazaki is wearing Nausicaa from the Valley of the Winds flying helmet. So they all have little indicators. Tezuka in the first design had a little black beret, which we figured that'd fly off during ninja, during martial arts, that would not stay on her head. But I miss it because Tezuka himself always wore a little natty black beret in every photograph of himself. So, but that's the origin. So we did a first issue. It was one of the most flattering things anyone has ever said to me, that when I was working on it, Kevin said, I'm going to draw the layouts on this. I think it should really have that feel of the early Ninja Turtles. So I worked with him on that. And then a great Canadian artist named Troy Little did the final inking on it.
Nice. That's spectacular. So as far as these characters are concerned and stuff in this series, what's going on? Is this heading into, is it going to be a continuation? Is it a one shot?
We did 2 Drawing Blood. I mean, the Ragdolls are kind of the tag that wags the dog of Drawing Blood. Drawing Blood is the main project about this sort of midlife crisis, career angst of an artist. And when we did our first Kickstarter, this is part of why that comic exists. I was like, we're doing something that's more like All That Jazz or Fellini's 8½, an artist sort of looking back over his life and having flashbacks and memories and fantasies. Your audience is not the audience for that. Your millions of worldwide fans like to see funny animals fighting crime. So why don't we actually do an in-universe Ragdolls comic book? So we did the special origin issue. It's 32 pages. It's, just like the first Ninja Turtles comic. It's too many pages for a modern comic. It's, it's inappropriately long. But we did 2 Kickstarters for Drawing Blood for a total of 8 issues. I've just started writing issue 9 of that. We have a lot of plans for other Ragdolls stuff. Troy came up with a great storyline for another Ragdolls project that's now done, a 40-page special. Because we're in all of the spin-offs from Drawing Blood, we're commenting on the history of comic books and the eras of comic books. So Troy confessed to us that inking Kevin Eastman is very hard for anyone to do. Kevin's got a lot of details. He's his own style, and it's very hard, I'm sure, to ink over him.
Completely.
He wanted to do one. Troy wanted to do one in his own more cartoony style, and he said, "How about instead of doing the second issue of Ragdolls in continuity, let's jump forward 6 years and do the comic that was the tie-in to the Ragdolls animated series that was for children." Okay. So the second issue, the second thing we did is a Ragdolls, I think it's called the Ragdolls Animated Adventures or something like that. And it's a more cartoony Troy little kind of a style. And Troy came up with the story. I'm not particularly a children's writer. I tend to write very much for adults. And Troy came up with a plot I would not have come up with in a trillion years. That's not my way my brain works. He came up with a very Nickelodeon cartoon plot line, and it's great. And I did a dialogue pass on it, and Troy drew it, and it's fantastic. That will go out with the second Kickstarter books. And then we are moving it into a comic book store space, but that's not finalized, and I don't know the dates, so I can't really say more about it than that.
You know, I love how when Kickstarter started, it was more like to kickstart films and stuff like that, into more of like for just artists and creators.
Oh yeah, no,
more
it's
of a thing. For that.
I first used Kickstarter in, I can't remember if it was 2011, 2012, a while ago, for a feature film. I produced a movie for about $150,000, and we did, I think, 90,000 on Kickstarter, and then we did the post-production budget. I thought it'd be easy. I thought it'd be hard to raise that much money on Kickstarter. None of us were really that famous or had any reason for anyone to give us that money. But I figured once we had the movie done, we could go back and say, okay, now we need to fund. And we made it clear, this is for production. We're coming back for post-production. And we did an Indiegogo for post-production and raised another $45,000, $50,000.
You did exactly what I did on a smaller scale. I did it for a web series. I don't know, for people that don't know this, I created a web series called The Blue Beetle Ted Kord Returns. It's a series based off of Ted Kord from Charlton and DC Comics character that Steve Ditko created. When I did that, I did a Indiegogo for production, and then for post I did a Kickstarter funding.
Yeah, you just did the you flipped who you went with. But yeah, it was a good model. And there are things we knew that there would be people who would be like, what does Kevin Eastman need my money for? Well, first of all, he hasn't owned the Turtles in 18 years, so and he spent a lot of those millions. He made some money selling them. And then he took that money and put it into a publishing venture called Tundra. And the rise and fall of Tundra is very much a part of the Drawing Blood comic book series. I think I changed it to Siberia Arts instead of Tundra, but it is a thinly fictionalized version of that rise and fall. And if you want to maintain complete, you need to self-fund. You need to, if you don't want publishers and editors telling you what to do, you need to self-fund. Whenever people complain about famous people getting involved in Kickstarter or Indiegogo, I always say the same thing. If Kickstarter had existed in the 1970s, Orson Welles would probably have directed 5 more movies.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Martin Scorsese would have made The Last Temptation of Christ in 1981, and it would have starred Robert De Niro.
Yeah.
History is full of people you think can get anything done not being able to get a thing that they want done. And
also Dune.
Yeah, Jodorowsky's Dune, right.
Jodorowsky's Dune.
Jodorowsky's Dune might have been shot. Now, who knows? Because he needed more money than existed in the world to shoot that thing. But he might have gotten closer, you know. So I never judge that. No one puts a gun to anyone's head. And I always think the Kickstarter is definitely a rising tide raises all boats. You know, whatever else Keanu Reeves might have done, he caused 100,000 people to sign up for Kickstarter who had never signed up before. And those people might or might not back my comics, but the barrier is creating that account.
Mm-hmm.
And when they got their Kickstarter updates about Berserker, they got recommended at least 4 other comics at the bottom of every email. And that's the mechanism. And none of us should complain about Keanu Reeves showing our projects to 100,000 people. You know.
Yep. Not at all. Not at all. David, this has been an absolute wonderful, just a pleasure to.
Thank you, Donald.
Before we let you go though, was there anything you wanted to mention, or Kevin, Chris, is there any other quick questions you guys had that you wanted to ask him before we wrap this up?
Yes, quick question. I was watching a few episodes of your Pulp Today YouTube channel.
Thank you.
On YouTube, and I was curious, what kind of spirit are you drinking during the show?
Usually something with vodka.
Oh, okay.
Usually vodka. Every once in a while, you can tell I'm drinking red wine. I think when I read The Man Who Was Thursday, which is kind of a very Catholic book, I thought it would be appropriate to drink red wine instead of vodka. And I will say this, there's only one episode in which I'm faking it and drinking water instead of actual liquor. I usually am actually drinking when I do those things, because I think it gives them I learned the trick from Dean Martin that people will forgive you almost anything if you got a drink in your hand. That's
true, man. And it kind of reminds me, it's kind of like an old school show if I was watching something on a television in the 1960s or 1950s, 1960s. That's kind of reminds me of, you know, just
I mean, when I started it, I didn't have the slightest idea that anyone would watch it at all. It was the pandemic, and I was like, if I don't do something that makes me put on a jacket and have a clean shave and clean hair at least once every 3-4 days, I'm going to become a caveman, and my wife will not like that. So that's what it was. And I saw on Instagram, Sir Patrick was reading Shakespeare sonnets every day. And I thought, well, what a nice, simple thing that is, and how entertaining it is. Now, I am not Sir Patrick Stewart. No one is that in love with the sound of my voice. But I just sort of asked myself, what's my version of sitting around reading a Shakespeare? Hello, today I'm going to do My Love is Like a Red, Red Rose. You know, like what's my version of that? And my version of that is I got all these books that I love. And I kind of like the fact that without really intending to, I'm up to episode 62 now. I've created a nice catalog of everything I've ever thought about literature. And since a quarter of them or half of them have been turned into movies, we talk about movies all the time as well. And I have guests on, I just had the amazing Gary Phillips on. I had been wanting to talk about Chester Himes because one of my favorite writers. I am a white guy. I do not want to read Chester Himes aloud. I think that would sound bad, me reading that dialogue. So I've been waiting patiently for some guest. And Gary Phillips was like, well, I could do Mickey Spillane or I could do Chester Himes. I was like, oh, please do Chester Himes for me. Please let me do my Chester Himes episode with you. So he did. Maybe next time we'll talk about Mickey Spillane. But
that I can't wait for too.
But yeah, I did want to mention that. The Pulp Today, it's a podcast. It's on all of the podcasting platforms except Spotify, which we pulled out of, I think, for very good reasons. And it's video on YouTube if you want to actually watch me drink while I read to you from various pulp novels.
Nice. Well, that sounds like a hoot. Please also make sure to check out David's other work, like we've talked about earlier. From Dynamite, he had just finished up Elvira meets Vincent Price, and he has done quite a few other Elvira series. Elvira Mistress of the Dark, issue 1 through 12, I believe. The Shape of Elvira, and Elvira the Omega Ma'am, if I recall, was
Yes.
the name of that one.
The Omega Ma'am, The Wrath of Khan is the sequel to that, and those were both Kickstarters, which are not available unless you sign up for one of the Kickstarters. And we just did a Kickstarter. Excuse me, we just did a Kickstarter for something called The Death of Elvira, which is kind of a parody of her memoir.
Okay.
It's her memoir if she had been Elvira since she was a little girl.
Nice.
And it's done by the great Italian artist Silvia Califano, who will also be drawing Elvira in Horrorland.
Oh, wow.
And boy, for the Kubrick issue, I said, can you really do 0-point perspective in every shot like Kubrick does? Can the framing all be that Stanley Kubrick flat centered framing? And she did it. And the effect is amazing. The comic book is like the movie.
That's so cool.
Really, she's so good. She's such an imaginative collaborator. I've been very lucky between her and Dave Acosta, Juan Samu on Elvira Meets Vincent Price. I've been very lucky with my collaborators.
That's awesome.
Great. That's great.
David, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you again for being a part of this. And those that are watching, please check out his work, check out his YouTube page, check out his podcast, comic books, all of that. And check out our podcast. We do a live show every Monday, usually every Monday at 7:30 p.m. Pacific time on the Rumble Spoon channel of the Real Short Boxes on there. We also do our audio podcasts. It's on pretty much every platform, Apple and iHeartRadio and all that fun stuff. So you can find us there. And again, this was a lot of fun. Hope to see you again sometime soon. Another signing.
Thanks, guys. Feel free to have me back. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Well, especially when this other series comes out, we'll want to talk more about that.
Yeah, and also I should say people should keep an eye out for Savage Tales. That just got announced. Dynamite is doing a Savage Tales anthology. I thought it was going to be all obscure characters because they had me do Alan Quatermain and Gulliver of Mars. But the other two characters in it are Red Sonja and Vampirella. So I guess not. But I wrote the turn of the century, me being me. They had me write the obscure turn of the century heroes.
That's cool, though. I do like those characters, so I'm excited to read them. So thank you again. And if we don't see you or our audience out and about anytime soon, perhaps we'll see you
at the intellectual, witty, but always salacious comic book